Right, let's jump straight into this explainer. Think for just a second about how many hours a day you spend staring at a web browser. For most of us, it's easily the single most used application on our devices, right? I mean, it's our primary window to the entire digital world. And yet, we rarely stop to think about how it actually got there. So today, we're going to trace a chronological journey, transforming what most of us consider a pretty mundane everyday tool into this fascinating high-stakes story of tech monopolies, massive complacency, and fiercely independent niche rebellions. Look at your screen right now and honestly ask yourself, why did you choose that specific browser? Take a moment to really think about it, because as we unpack this history, we're going to see that this choice used to be entirely made for us. You didn't pick your window to the web, it was literally just handed to you in a box. But today, the landscape couldn't be more vastly different, driven by wildly varying philosophies.
You know, the internet's history is essentially built on major paradigm shifts. We've moved from this rigid, single-player monopoly where one company held all the keys to today's hyper-fragmented ecosystem where you can choose a browser tailored to almost any specific need you can imagine. And the driving force behind this entire evolution? It's kind of funny. Every single one of these chronological leaps happened for the exact same reason. A giant got incredibly complacent, and a rebel got incredibly frustrated.
Which brings us to Section 1, the Internet Explorer Monopoly.
Let's start our chronological journey with the era of the lazy king. Back in the late 90s and early 2000s, Microsoft won the internet. But here's the thing. They absolutely did not win through groundbreaking continuous innovation. They won through sheer convenience. If you bought a Windows PC, it had a blue E on the desktop. That was the internet. Get this, at its peak, Internet Explorer commanded a staggering 95% market share. That level of dominance was so extreme it actually triggered a historic U.S. Department of Justice antitrust lawsuit. The core argument was that by strictly bundling IE directly with Windows, Microsoft was engaging in anti-competitive behavior. They were effectively choking out competitors like Netscape before the race even began. Microsoft fought it, partially lost, but ultimately kept bundling the browser anyway.
The reality of the time was incredibly simple. You didn't really choose a browser, you just opened Internet Explorer and hoped for the best. And once Microsoft had the market firmly in its grasp, they completely stalled out. Updates became incredibly rare, bugs multiplied and went unfixed for literally years. Actually, Internet Explorer was so remarkably slow and outdated that it became a global joke. I mean, it was universally known as the browser you open just to download another browser. By the time it died a very quiet death in 2022, Microsoft hadn't just lost the browser war, they had deeply alienated an entire generation of early internet users.
And that leads us to Section 2, Chrome resets the web.
Moving into our next era, we hit 2008. Google arrived at the absolute perfect time to capitalize on Microsoft's massive complacency. They launched a product that finally, genuinely felt modern. In 2008, Chrome won because it was a total revelation. It was incredibly clean, it was lightning fast, and it introduced isolated tabs, meaning if one poorly coded website crashed, it didn't take down your whole browser session with it. But let's contrast that with the modern reality of today. Over time, Chrome evolved into a highly resource-heavy data vacuum. It's famous for just eating up your computer's memory. And recently, Google introduced a major underlying code change called Manifest v3. To put it simply, this change actively caps how your ad blockers work, severely limiting extensions like uBlock Origin. So with modern Chrome, you're constantly trading control and privacy for ecosystem convenience.
So how did Microsoft respond? Well, in 2015, they panicked and launched Edge, a modern-looking browser that ultimately failed because it just couldn't keep up with Chrome's web standards. Then came the real irony. Microsoft essentially surrendered. In 2020, they completely threw out their own code and rebuilt Edge using Google's open-source underlying architecture. And suddenly, it worked perfectly. Today, Edge is a genuinely great browser with excellent vertical tabs and strong performance. But unfortunately, it is hampered by incredibly desperate operating system prompts, begging you not to switch to Chrome and injecting AI Copilot into your sidebar whether you actually asked for it or not.
Okay, moving on to Section 3, Ecosystems versus Independent Engines.
As Google's architecture aggressively took over the web, powering Chrome, Edge, and dozens of other competitors, we entered a whole new era. Now, it really helps to understand what a browser engine actually is. Think of it as the motor inside your car. It's the core foundational code that reads raw data and translates it into the beautiful, interactive websites you see on your screen. Because of Google's massive success, we suddenly found ourselves in a landscape where only a couple of major holdouts prevented one single company from controlling the internet's underlying code. The biggest, most powerful of those holdouts is Apple's Safari. Safari uses its own independent engine called WebKit. Now, Safari is a total fortress. It's highly optimized for MacBooks, giving you incredible battery life and deep system-level privacy features. But it is an absolute walled garden. Apple aggressively dictates that on iPhones and iPads, Safari's WebKit is the only allowed engine. This is a wild realization for a lot of people. If you download Chrome or Firefox on your iPhone, you aren't actually using Chrome or Firefox. You are literally just using Safari wearing a Google or Mozilla mask. Apple isn't trying to win the whole web. They are simply guarding their own massive user base.
And honestly, this engine monopoly creates a profound tragedy for the last truly independent rebel, Firefox. From a massive 30% market share around 2010, they have plummeted to under 3% today. Firefox matters immensely because it's the only major browser left that is not built on Google's engine or Apple's engine. If Firefox dies, the independent open web suffers a massive, perhaps unrecoverable blow. Despite a shrinking user base and some internal organizational controversies over the years, it remains a vital, absolute champion for an open internet.
Finally, let's look at Section 4, Modern Niche Innovations.
Because Google effectively won the engine war, raw speed is no longer the main battlefield. Almost every modern browser is fast enough. So, to survive in today's crowded market, modern browsers are competing purely on specialized philosophies and hyper-specific user needs. For instance, Opera GX is a browser built quite literally for gamers. It features actual CPU and RAM limiters built right into the sidebar, ensuring that the browser doesn't eat up your computer's resources while you're in the middle of an intense gaming match. It has highly customizable, flashy aesthetics and reactive sound effects. Though it is also worth noting as a neutral data point that Opera was acquired by a Chinese consortium back in 2016, which is a detail some privacy-focused users definitely factor into their software choices today.
When it comes to the highly competitive privacy space, we see two completely opposite philosophies. Brave, which was actually created by the co-founder of Mozilla, acts like a complex cockpit for power users. It aggressively blocks trackers by default so pages load incredibly fast, and it offers an optional cryptocurrency reward system for those who want to view privacy-respecting ads. DuckDuckGo, on the other hand, takes a pure set-it-and-forget-it approach. There's no crypto, no granular dials to tweak, just a simple browser built around a giant, prominent fire button. You tap it once, and a fun little animation completely wipes your entire digital footprint, closing all tabs and erasing all data with zero friction.
Now, if you need extreme privacy, you look at Tor. This isn't just about hiding your search history from targeted advertisers. Tor is a vital, specialized tool built for true survival-level anonymity. By deliberately bouncing your connection across a labyrinth of encrypted, volunteer-run servers all around the globe, it protects highly vulnerable identities. It's the browser relied upon by journalists operating in authoritarian regimes, human rights activists, and whistleblowers.
So, the overarching lesson in the modern web is that absolutely nothing is free. When you step up your privacy, you inevitably pay a heavy tax inconvenience. Brave's aggressive shields might completely break a few heavily scripted websites you rely on. LibreWolf, which is a fantastic project that strips all data collection out of Firefox, costs you cloud syncing and seamless automatic updates. And Tor, the ultimate privacy tool, it will reduce your browsing speed to an absolute crawl and regularly get you blocked by basic sites that think you're a bot. You know, you always have to choose your compromise.
Before we wrap up this chronological deep dive, we really have to mention two massive outliers on the fringes. First, Samsung Internet quietly powers over 1 billion downloads simply by being the reliable pre-installed default on Galaxy phones, holding a very respectable share of the mobile market. And then there's Arc. Starting in 2023, Arc boldly tried to reinvent the browser as a full operating system for the web, tossing out traditional tabs entirely for fluid workspaces, split screens, and powerful command centers. It was incredibly ambitious. But just recently, in 2025, they had to pause major feature development. The hard truth was that reimagining the internet was simply too steep of a learning curve, and it became too complex for the average user to adopt. And that brings us to the end of our timeline. The entire history of the browser market is just a repeating, fascinating cycle. A giant gets complacent, a rebel gets frustrated, and the landscape shifts all over again. As you look at your own daily digital habits, think deeply about the tools you use. Are you passively trading your computer's memory for speed with Chrome? Are you trading convenience for granular privacy with Brave? What specific trade-off are you currently making, and more importantly, is it time for a change?